Hey everyone, welcome to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast, the ultimate blueprint to self-love and inner peace. I'm your host, Danielle Van. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, a life coach to women, meditation teacher, and author, I've spent my life studying and learning from the stories that make us human. It's my passion and goal to help you shift your mindset and create a lifelong revolution to help you reach your greatest potential. Life is filled with ebbs and flows, ups and downs, and how we approach our lives and our daily practices hugely impacts our ability to be present and to live in the state of flow. What is the state of flow? It's living in the most optimal experience possible. It's where we feel whole, we have awareness about ourselves, and we live in a focused state of seeking and understanding. That leaves many questioning how we can find this state, and most importantly, stay within it. This week, I sat down with peak performance coach Kerry Fisher to talk about the micro practices each of us can do daily to not only help us find our state of flow, but stay within it. And through that experience, how we can find a state of meaning within our lives. So let's dive right in. The Get Your Life Together Girl podcast starts right now. All right, I'm so excited to have you here, Kerry. We are really going to dive into what I talk about so often, which is the 5 pillars of, living that really helps us own our lives. And so, of course, if you are new to this podcast, then we are talking about mental, emotional, physical, financial, and spiritual health. And Kerry, I know that that's sort of your jam as well. Love to kind of introduce yourself, if you would.
Hi, how are you? Good to be with you today. I'm Kerry Fisher, and I am very interested in the very same pillars as you. And I love that you put the financial pillar in. And the fact is that we need to be healthy across all of the pillars of our lives. I would even expand it beyond the ones that you've spoken about. It's really everything that we surround ourselves with. We want to have the best life in all ways that we possibly can. So I'm excited to talk with you today about how you can actually get that happening in your own life.
I love that. If you've listened to the podcast, then you know that I love to have a little bit of understanding of where you came from and how you got to this place. Could you share a little bit about your story? And then let's dive right into those pillars like you talked about.
Sure. So I'm a mom of 5, and I was a practicing attorney. And I found that I wasn't great at work and I wasn't great at home. I felt like I was spread really thin. And, I kind of always did think you could have it all. And I think that you can, but you have to define how you want those things to look, So I felt like being spread so thin, I really wasn't utilizing the full power of who I am, I guess, and I really wanted to be there more for my children. So I decided to make the switch from law, moving all into the wellness world and educating people about all of these tools, which I myself used to live a life of ease and flow, a life of peak performance. And so I just started teaching other people all of these tools that I myself have been using for so many years.
It's a huge switch to go from such a defined career to really using those tools. I know myself. Can you talk about, you use the word peak performance. It's something that so many people are talking about right now, but not a lot of people understand. So can you define that for us, and how can we start using that, set of tools in our own life?
Right. So for me, peak performance and mindset are intertwined. So I was always studying all of these different modalities since I was very young, probably teenager. I started to get interested in it because I was a competitive gymnast. And I always wanted to find out, how could I have an edge? And even back then, one of my coaches was teaching me about visualization, how you could visualize your routine, the night before the competition, and that would help your performance. She would always have us right before we would be about to do our floor routine. We would be sitting on the side, our team, and just envisioning the perfect routine, actually. So I was always interested in this. And I was like, I wonder how you could take that from gymnastics into your life and live a life of flow, because I always knew I wanted a lot of kids. I knew I wanted like an active life. I knew I wanted to be able to work and do everything. I really did think I could have it all. I think that I didn't stop to define what was the most important thing to me. And always the most important thing for me was having a balanced life. And I think that when you're a professional, when you're an attorney, or when you have a lot of kids, one or the other, I was doing both. It's very hard to have balance. It's just two very demanding things. So I'm always interested in how could you take those peak performance tips and bring them into people's lives. And I always found that people know what they're supposed to be doing. They know they should eat right. They know they should exercise. They know they should tend to their relationships and, to everything in their lives, their mental health, physical health, their emotional, everything. And then why don't they do it? Because people don't find the time, or they think it will take a long time.
Right.
They don't want to take like an hour every day or 2 hours or 3 hours every day. So I think that you can get there by doing small little tweaks every day, which is what I teach people. Simple changes done consistently over time lead to huge results. That's what I believe in.
Absolutely. That is such an empowered statement just right there, because you're right. Most people think, well, I don't want to do the healing work because this is years of conflict within myself or conflict in my life. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to dig up the things. I don't want to have to create these new practices that, like you said, an hour to 2 hours. But you're right. Small, simple steps. Let's start with the visualization part, because that is so important. You're right. So many people know I need to be doing this, but I'm not doing it. How can we start using visualization? I know I personally use it. I teach it as well. How can we use that in our daily lives to create the life that we want, especially what you said, life balance?
Well, you really have to think about the fact that every single thing that you see around you was first visualized in somebody's mind. You have to first visualize something before you can bring it into form in the world. Right. So people have been practicing visualization, especially athletes, probably since the 1950s, I would say. It just wasn't really spoken about. The higher level athletes always had access to this. The top performers always had coaches that would teach them these kinds of techniques. They've been around forever. And it's basically that if you set your mind to something and you just keep imagining it, your brain will start to notice things in your surroundings that you need in order to make that thing come true. It's not magic. It's really that you're priming your brain like, okay, I want to be an author. I want to be an author. So now maybe I'll see a book that's, how do you write a book? So maybe I'll buy that book. Maybe I'll meet someone who is, and who writes articles. How do you do that? I'll find out about that. So it's really more like visualizing so you can see your vision, but also so that you can prime your brain to notice all the clues around you so that you can notice when opportunities present themselves to you.
I actually just did a podcast episode about that. And so you can go in and listen to that, talking about how our RAS system is really important in our day-to-day life in creating exactly what we want. That visualization is step number one in all things, right? Because we have to tell our brain and our body what we need. And that is a lot of missing piece, for a lot of people, is where they don't actually, sit down and say, what do I want? What do I need? Do you find that that is a big thing for most people?
Well, I think that people, maybe they did do it at one point of their life, but they don't remember to continually do it because we change and grow, So what you want when you're single is different than what you want when you're first married. What you want when you're first married is different than what you want when you have young children. So I think that what happens is we fall into a rut, like, oh, I made all of these decisions. This is what I'm doing with my life now. And we feel like we can't pivot. I think that we live in a time now that it's really important to continually ask yourself, is this really where I want to be in life? And I think that we have, after the pandemic, we've all kind of sat down and said, well, what is important to me?
Right.
So I think it's important to find something that really feeds your soul. I think that as you go through life, maybe for a while you're chasing money. You want to be financially secure. Once you're financially secure, though, you still are chasing something. And I find that people typically end up chasing meaning. So they want their life to have meaning, So once you check all the boxes in life, what do you really want? Like, why am I here? What am I here to give? And I think it's a really powerful thing to ask yourself, what am I here? What am I here to give? What am I here to share?
That's a beautiful line of thought that I would love to chase at this moment is finding meaning. So many women have a hard time allowing themselves to get into that state of thought. We're so busy, like you said, the career, the children, the demands in our lives that we don't stop and say, what is most important to me? What is going to create the most fulfilling life? Can you kind of open the door as to how we begin to find that path?
Yeah, totally. And, it's not even just having your children, your career, then at a certain point, you're also dealing with your own parents, you know what I mean, as your parents get older. So I think women really aren't taught to ask themselves that question, but I don't think that people in general are.
Right.
I think that like every 5 years, you should be seriously asking yourself, like, which direction should I go? What am I doing? And for women, especially, is it something you really want, or is it something that's expected of you? We need to take it off a lot of layers, and once you become a mom, like, are you ever able to move on and have your own life at a certain point? Are you then supposed to, always dedicate yourself to your children? So, I think that at each stage of life, it's important to realize, okay, this is the chapter of life I'm in, and get really honest with yourself about what you want. How much time do you want to dedicate to helping others? How much time do you want to dedicate to, whatever your pursuits are as you get older? But one thing that I really love to teach women in general and people in general is it's really great to start a meditation practice at any point of your life.
Right.
Because when you start a meditation practice, that's when you can kind of go inward, you become a little more still. And I think that you start to be able to be quiet enough to ask yourself those important questions about meaning.
Agreed. Yeah. As a meditation instructor myself and have taught so many, that skill set alone, if you are fearful of doing the healing work, if you're not sure what you want and what you need, if you aren't sure if you're living your purpose, that is the number one thing that you can do to get into a space where you can actually just hear your inner voice. Can you elaborate on what your thoughts are on getting into that space? Because I know a lot of, we all teach meditation and we practice ourselves, but for somebody who's standing on the outside that says, I'm not so sure I could do that, I'm not sure I can get quiet enough, some tips and tools from your perspective as to how to do that.
Well, it can be kind of scary when you first do it. I remember years ago when I first took a yoga class when I was in my 20s, I was standing on the mat and I was like, what are all those thoughts going on in my head? I was like a little alarmed, actually. And after the class, I said to the teacher, something is wrong in my head, that I have this like constant stream of thoughts. And he's like, no, that's what you always have that. And I'm like, no, I don't. I think I would have known I had that. And he said, no, you always have it. So he's like, keep coming to yoga. And when you keep going back to the yoga mat, it's because you start even just noticing your thoughts.
Right.
Forget about even leaping. So I think that the mistake people make a lot of times when they start a meditation practice is they think they're going to sit down, clear their minds, and everything is going to be zen and quiet. But what actually happens is the opposite. You sit down and all of a sudden you're like, there's a lot of crazy in my head and I want it to stop. But that's really the first step of meditation. The first step is noticing, oh, I have a stream of thoughts going on. And then for me, meditation is changing those thoughts from more negative to a more positive mindset, like always having more of a positive stream in my head. And then that also ties right back into peak performance. Because for me, the more positive I can keep my thinking, the more I accomplish in life, the better I feel. I'm just better in all areas.
Yeah. Positive thoughts are something that a lot of people struggle with. We have that undertone of negativity all the time. Of course, our brain's number one job is to keep us safe, and safety sometimes means holding everything away, right? And so that can lead to a negative thought. Neutral thoughts are far better than a negative, or even sometimes jumping from a negative to a positive, which is not always possible. How do you teach people to find that positive stream of thought outside of the whirlpool of the mind?
Well, really, the first step is noticing the negative stream, right? So to me, getting a meditation practice, and it can be something as simple as soon as you wake up in the morning, your alarm goes off, you hit the alarm, you sit up in your bed, and you just start to notice what your thoughts are. So noticing is always the first step in any kind of, creating any kind of change. So you notice that you're having those thoughts. And I think accepting them, okay, well, I'm having these negative thoughts or whatever the thoughts are that you're having. So notice them, accept them. And you really need to just make an effort to delete them and then replace them with a more positive thought. And as you said, your brain will naturally switch over always to the negative because it's trying to keep you safe. So you're literally rewiring your brain. So you go easy on yourself. You understand that your brain does have this tendency to stay in the negative, and you're just trying to move it more to the positive. But definitely the more positive you keep yourself, your brain, and your thoughts, for sure, that's when you are able to accomplish the most. At least for me, it has happened that way. I don't know if you've had experience with that, but when you're really in a state where you're feeling like one with everything, and it's like that, it's that state of being in the flow, in the zone, athletes call it, then everything just seems to be accomplished so easily. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I like to teach that there's actually two states of flow being positive, flow being negative. So what flow are we reaching for, right? Because I think that what happens so often is once we catch that wave of negative thoughts, it takes a lot for us to undo it. It takes a lot for us to witness, accept, and then create something new. And if we get into the positive, those negative thoughts that pop in are not as heavy. We absolutely have the ability to flip them. And you're right, we are rewiring the brain 100% of the time when we're feeding ourselves with what is working for us and not what is against us. As you talk about the flow, I want to dig a little bit deeper into that, because I think too that we're talking about finding that meaning. Because if we're in the flow, then meaning becomes a much more natural place to reach. Do you feel that that's the case?
Well, for me, for sure, the closer I come to living on purpose, the closer I come to my work being my meaning, and, trying to be myself no matter where I am, not being one way when I'm parenting and another way when I'm working, just being the same person throughout. I think it's very helpful to find that even flow. It definitely is, but for me, I find it helpful to have routines that I have set up throughout the day to bring me back to my flow. So instead of having to practice it, I like to weave it through my day, so in the morning, I always start off with meditation, or sometimes I'll do some journaling in the morning, but I have a morning routine, and I would suggest for everybody to get a morning routine. I have an evening routine. So for a few minutes before bed, I'll listen to music, or I meditate. Sometimes I do some breath work. I might read during, that nighttime period. But if you know that you're starting and ending every one of your days with these routines and these set things that you do that nourish yourself, it really doesn't even matter what happens in the middle of the day,
Right.
So seeking to begin and end your days in flow allows you to stay in flow throughout the day. And the more in flow you are, the more you can tap into your creativity. That's how it works for me. I'm not sure if you've experienced that for yourself.
100%. 100%. Yeah. Because what we're doing is we're opening the mind, and we are in a state where we're not constantly ruminating. We're not constantly trying to figure things out, but we are present moment. And that awareness does open the entire flow of energy within us. And so that is so important. I love that you said morning and night. A lot of times people don't want to commit to that, space, but we're not talking about hours like we talked about just a few minutes ago. If you can sit and meditate for 10, 15 minutes, sometimes that's the same benefit of sitting for an hour, depending on, how productive, you were in that time and how calm and clear you were able to get. Evening time routine is something a lot of people struggle with. I love that you said maybe reading, it may be listening to music, it might be breath work. I think what's so important for women to understand is it doesn't have to be this cookie cutter experience every time. Do you see that a lot of people, when they start working with you, have that kind of idea that I need to do this and then
Well,
that?
they want me to tell them what it is.
Right.
Exactly. Like they're
Yeah.
ready to like write it down. Like I will get every detail of this. And the point is to learn the techniques and the tools. So I like to teach people literally 5-minute tools, 5 minutes or less tools that they can use. But the truth is every tool doesn't work for every person. So you learn all the different things I can teach you. Simple, and everything is simple. You don't have to like really read a book it would be good to read books, but even if you don't read books, it's something you can learn. You can meditate. You could sit up for 5 minutes and just pay attention to what thoughts you have. Or you could sit up for 5 minutes and notice your breath coming in and out. That's meditation. That's a breath work, So I like to teach people these simple tools, and then you have to use them. So you use them to create a morning routine and an evening routine. But the main goal of learning the tools is not even just for those. It's really because in the middle of the day, when you really are feeling overwhelmed or you're stressed out because you have a meeting, you're like, oh, I could do that box breathing. I remember Kerry taught me. So they're like, okay, do the box breathing. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4. So you're learning the tools, not just to use them in the morning and the evening. You're practicing them in the mornings and the evenings. But it's so during the daytime when you really need it, you're like, okay, I could close my eyes for 1 minute right here and just relax and, relax my body from the top of my head to my feet, or I can meditate for 2 minutes right now, So that's what it's really all about. It's not just learning the tools, it's using them, taking action, That's the piece I notice people forget.
Yes.
They know what to do. You can also Google it. You could always find out how to do something. They have time to do it. Everybody has 5 minutes, but they don't do it. So take action. I believe in taking even imperfect action is better than not taking action at all,
Yeah, 100%. I think what you said is so important, and I want to dive into that just for a moment, is that we teach tools. We teach all of the abilities to get ourselves out of the spin, get out ourselves, in a place where we can get back into the grounded moment and into the flow. And when we get dysregulated, what happens is we forget the tools. I know I always get the SOS messages. This is happening and this is happening and I can't. I'm like, you have tools. You have tools. Are you using the tools? You have tools. We have to practice the tools morning, night, whenever, so that when we do feel dysregulated, that we have the ability to calm ourselves back down. Would you share some of your 5-minute tools with us? I know you said box breathing. It's something I love. I love box breathing. I love breath work. I love all of it. What are some of your tools that you find work the best?
Well, I always suggest doing a meditation. So just 2 easy ones I already talked about. One is just noticing your thoughts. So you can do that for 1 or 2 minutes. One is noticing your breath coming in and out of your body. The box breathing is simple. Breathing in for 4, holding your breath for 4, breathing out for 4. Holding your breath for 4. It's things that you love to do yourself. So let's just say you love to do yoga. So 5 minutes of yoga, or you don't do yoga, but you feel tight. So 5 minutes of stretching, 5 minutes of jumping jacks, 5 minutes of running in place, 5 minutes of sitting in the sun with the sun on your face, putting your favorite playlist on and dancing, so there's so many things. Or you could just write for 5 minutes. You can read a poem, so there's so many different things you can do. And my main advice is to find the things you like to do and do those things. So if you love to be outside, then make sure your 5 minutes of relaxation is going outside. One of my friends does something, she practices 10 minutes of joy every single day. So every day she just finds 10 minutes. It's the same 10 minutes every day. I think it's at 6 o'clock. It's before she gives her kids their dinner. but after she's done with work and she just does something she loves for 10 minutes. So she loves to sing. So she like listens to music and she sings and dances around. So, it's just what works for you in your lifestyle. That's what the answer is, finding what works for you.
I think it's so important to point out that everything that you mentioned had a physical element to it. That's so important. We tend to take in our emotions, we store them, we bottle them up and sit on them until it becomes too much. The key to not doing that is processing. And so when you mentioned all of these physical exercises or things, when somebody's working with me, I'll often say, okay, your homework for this week is to move your body. And they're like, well, I don't know how that will help. Well, we're not storing things, right? So I love that you mentioned the physical element to all of those things. Even writing, guys, it's a physical movement. So obviously, as an athlete yourself and talking about peak performance, that must be something that you feel is so important as well.
I think it's closely related, honestly. I think that the body and the mind work really well together. Mm-hmm. So, when you're writing, I think it's very helpful, instead of some people they call it like writer's block, but instead of having writer's block, just get up and go outside, take a walk, come back, sit down, and you'll notice that you could start writing again. I think that one fuels the other. I think that keeping yourself physically healthy and active helps you keep mentally and emotionally healthy and active. At least that's how it works for me. Because people forget the body is all one. It all works together holistically, body, mind, spirit, know?
Exactly. Is there something that you feel is key in staying in the flow?
For me, key to staying in flow is definitely eating right. Mm-hmm. Always making sure I get enough to drink. So I love to drink tea. So I tend to drink too much tea and not enough water. So when I hydrate, that's really helpful to me. I don't know. For me, knowing my flow, I know that if I get up and get my work done earlier in the morning, and then if I exercise and, stretch early in the morning, I feel better to have gotten everything done early in the day. But I think that when my kids were younger, I was better off doing that in the afternoons. So always figuring out what the perfect time for you is to do your actual work. I believe that you could do a lot more in 2 to 4 hours of very focused work when you're in the zone than you can when you're trying to force yourself into a pattern. And that's the other thing, are you someone who likes to really schedule themselves? So if you are, schedule yourself completely. Mm-hmm. And if you're someone who works more in the flow, then, make blocks of work time where maybe it's a little bit more open within the block of what you're working on, but that you are working during that time period. So for me, it's always about learn the tools and then use the tools that work for you and constantly check your system to make sure that you're still staying on target.
I think the next natural question for those that would be listening would say, how do I identify that I'm in the flow? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? It's going to be different for everybody, but are there some key factors that we can kind of witness to know, this is flow?
I feel like it's hard because it is different for everybody, but everybody has had some common experiences that feels like flow, at least to me. So when you see a rainbow, or even better, like a double rainbow, I remember seeing a double rainbow over Niagara Falls. And it was one of the most beautiful sights. So all of us felt that same feeling. And it was that oneness. Or if you're ever driving on a long car trip and all of a sudden you notice that you got to your destination, but you kind of don't remember driving there, even though you were the driver. And then you're like, oh, I was in that zone, so it's that zone, if you're an athlete, if you're a skier, like we are, I get it on the mountain sometimes right after it snows and there's just it's just so beautiful. You sense it at like sunrise and sunset. It's sort of like a quiet feeling. So I think that people know the feeling when they're in the flow. It's when you're in your happy place, people call it, for me, that would be the beach. Mm-hmm. So it's when you just feel one with everything around you and you're not worried about the past or the future. You're in this moment and everything's going to happen as it's supposed to. You don't really have to worry about making anything happen. It just sort of happens naturally. That to me is the flow feeling.
What you described is the nowness, the awareness of now. And It is so important to be in that space where we're not ruminating, where we're not overthinking, we're not trying to make something happen. As you said, that is so important. We spend so much of our lives forcing issues and trying to make things happen, and we're creating our own struggle most of the time. So that flow is so essential because there's no resistance in it. You find that resistance is sort of the cusp of where most people want to quit.
Well, we all want to quit when it gets tough,
Right.
and the truth of the matter is you learn it over and over, no matter what teaching you're learning from, no
Mhm.
matter what modality, that it really is actually on the cusp of your discomfort. That's where the growth really happens.
Mhm.
In yoga, they say that the lotus flower comes up out of the mud, and
Right.
gunky stuff. So when you look at your own life, which I recommend for everybody to do it, if you look back at your own lifetime and you see the moments that you like had your highest highs and then the moments you had your lowest lows when you dropped to your knees, the lowest lows are when you did the most growth, most likely.
Yeah.
That's what made you be more compassionate. That's what made you maybe see how other people feel. Whereas maybe if you hadn't had that happen to you, you wouldn't have been quite as understanding of other people. So it's really important to realize that it's those dark moments that really are where we can really see how much we can grow. I always look at the butterfly. What happened to the butterfly? First, it's a caterpillar, then it goes into that cocoon and it like liquefies itself basically before it comes out as
Mhm.
the beautiful butterfly with the beautiful wings. But trust me, I don't think that the liquefying process was particularly comfortable.
It's a very good point you make. That's true. We often use that image too in our head about the butterfly. And I've never heard it described like that. That's so true.
The gooey part in the middle.
True. I think that's our lives, right? Is that we start one place, we have a lot of gooey moments, and then we
Yeah.
have this awakening, this empowerment within ourselves where we have the ability to really show up. And that is flow, is to show up. That's peak performance. That's really getting into those 5 pillars and living our best experience. Was it a hard shift for you to allow yourself to change careers and be in a place where you really did want to live your best experience?
For me, it wasn't. I mean, I feel like I don't really plan or think ahead well in general as a human. I just sort of like do things. I've always been like that. So when I was a senior in college, I actually dropped out of college so I can backpack. Like I thought that was a plan.
Mm.
I thought that was a really fantastic plan, actually. My mother's like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "No, this is such a good idea." And I literally gave away everything I owned and backpacked instead of graduating. And I think I just always went for like the experience of living. My
Mm.
mother actually did give me the freedom to understand that you only live once and you should live for yourself, and you should live, if you're not feeling like you're living your best life, that you should have the courage to pivot. And I think that now people are realizing that in their lifetime, they will pivot a
Mhm.
few times, just the way things are moving so quickly and the way jobs are changing so quick. But I think I always knew that. I always knew that I could always change my profession, or I also always thought of, I was always a big reader. So I always thought of books in chapters or in volumes, and that you have different
Mhm.
parts of your life, a part when you're a mom, a part when you're single, a part when you're a grandmother, a part when you're whatever age.
Mhm.
So for me, it wasn't hard. And I just think that it's important to follow your heart and your dreams. I want to get to the end of my life and not look back and be like, oh, I wish I had written
Right.
that book. I wish I had done this thing. I want to do all the things that I dream of, for
Mhm.
me at
Mhm.
least.
I love the idea of chapters because I always say, look at the timeline of your life and look at the timestamps. What were you doing? How was that impacting you? How was that impacting your legacy that you're trying to build in your life? And I'm not talking about financial, I'm talking about how you made yourself and other people feel. What was the legacy in that time and what happened to create the next chapter? So beautiful to really take that practice and make it something that is sort of the foundation of everything that we're doing so that we know, hey, things are going to change. And that's okay. I love that you had the awareness to allow that change. So many people don't. We get caught in, I have to do this and I'm supposed to do that, and I'm only allowed to do this. It really does upend a lot of people.
Well, that goes back again to figuring out, is it you that wanted the thing that you
Mhm.
have, that you're going after, or is it something someone put into your head, society, your teachers, your parents? So life is a process of uncovering, is that really what I want? Or is that what someone really told me I wanted? And we do change. And I think that people used to not really acknowledge that you
Right.
do change at different chapters of your life. You do want different things, and that's okay. And
Mhm.
if we can learn to use all the tools that we have at all the easy and the more difficult moments of our lives, that's when our whole life becomes ease and flow,
Yeah.
right? No matter what's going on, it's equanimity. It's
Mhm.
good, bad, who knows?
Right.
You just take whatever comes, you handle it, and you move along. That's when you're really able to live at your highest, I believe.
Agreed. Agreed 100%. You mentioned meditation as the starting point for finding that meaning and being in the flow. If someone already has a practice that's pretty well established, what would the next phase be for finding that meaning in your life? I
Well,
should maybe say living the meaning in your life.
that's when I would definitely start to do some more of these guided meditations.
Mhm.
There's so many different apps that you can get now, or you could just Google it with like a specified target. So, like to figure out your life's vision or your life's purpose. So, a
Mhm.
targeted guided meditation, like, my perfect future. Or you yourself can do it. You can
Mhm.
sit down and sort of just make a list. You could call it like a kitchen, like a brain dump. You just like
Mhm.
write it down, every single thing you think of, like write down everything but the kitchen sink. And it's like every single dream you ever had. And you write every single thing you possibly can imagine down on your list. You like really just don't hold yourself back, and then you have to start taking action, right? So after you write down everything, you kind of need to narrow it down. What can I really get done? What do I really want to focus on? Then you start figuring out, how can I get that going? So you start
Mhm.
visualizing, what would that look like if I did that? And then you have to start taking action, though, concrete
Mhm.
action in the world. So I would say a combination of getting clearer and clearer on what you want, and then taking action in the real world to start along the path towards where you want to go, because it always seems like so far away, like how am I ever going to make that happen? But you always just have to take that first step. Take the
Mhm.
first step, then take the next step, and you just keep taking step by step as you learn how to get to where you're going, basically.
Mhm. Action always is required if we want results. And there's a difference between action and efforting, right? So you're talking about flow. So that's not efforting. Efforting means we're forcing, we're trying too hard, we are, creating problems for ourselves instead of just allowing the action to unfold, which of course is going to add more meaning and allowing us to stay in the positive flow of everything.
I think it's important for women and men to both realize that you really can take control over how you're feeling and the things that you're thinking. It
Right.
doesn't feel like it sometimes, or sometimes it feels like things are happening to us or people are doing things to us. But you
Right.
really can get to a moment where you realize, I'm ultimately responsible for every single thing that I'm thinking, every single
Mhm.
thing that I'm feeling. A few weeks ago, I actually went and had my brain wired up, and then we were meditating and they were checking our brain waves. And you could actually see when you're thinking of like thoughts of love or gratitude or forgiveness, your brain pattern shows it, your brain
Yeah.
waves, right? So you have more like joyous states when you're in these kind of forgiveness states, these states of gratitude. So we like when you're after you see that, you realize we actually affect our emotions. We're deciding what to think and how to feel.
Right.
So, it's a matter of catching yourself when you're moving into a more negative space and wanting to rewire it, wanting to have a different outcome, wanting to be in more of a positive headspace. And eventually it does change. It happens so subtly that you don't even notice it a lot of times. But all of a sudden you notice things don't bother you as much. You're not quite as sensitive as you once were. And I think that it just has a benefit everywhere in your life. And you can always stop and take one long breath, right? So in through your nose and then out through your mouth. You can always do that. And you can always come back to yourself just from the one breath. You're always one breath away from resetting yourself.
Absolutely. And your nervous system wants you to take that breath. It wants you to find that center and calm. That's its natural state. Everything else is not natural. We bring that in and we create our experience based on whatever it is that we're attaching to. So yes, breath work, even just one breath is going to change the rhythm of your day. I love everything we talked about, Kerry. I think that it's so important for us to use these simple tools to get into the state of flow and find our meaning. Thank you for your time. If you've listened to this podcast, you know that I actually end every episode the same way, and that is with finding 3 pieces of personal gratitude for you, or 3 pieces of advice that you wish everyone knew. I'll allow you to decide what it is that you want, but please, what are your 3?
Remember that you can begin each of your days with very peaceful, calm thoughts, either just meditating or breathing quietly. You could also end your days that way. So you can begin your day with a morning routine. You can end your day with an evening routine. And you're always one breath away from resetting your nervous system and calming down. It's up to you to take that breath and remember to do it when you need it.
Beautiful 3. Thank you for your time and for your energy and all of the things that you are teaching everyone to do through your own personal experience and those great small tools that can make a big difference. We appreciate it. Thank you, Kerry, for reminding us that we are all in constant control of how we show up and the practices that can help shape us without taking all of our time and energy. If you're interested in learning more about Kerry, visit her website at kerryfishercoaching.com, or you can find her on Instagram at I am Kerry Fisher. Thank you so much for listening to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast. If you're interested in more tips to better your life, please turn on notifications to be alerted each week when new episodes are released. If you're seeking daily inspiration and additional tools, you can follow me on social media at Get Your Life Together Girl on Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok. You can also visit the show notes, the blog, and the Women's Circle on my website, getyourlifetogethergirl.com. Thank you for being a valuable part of this community. As always, we appreciate all shares and reviews. Until next time, be kind to yourself and others.